Going Steadily, a romantic novel by VMS. Life after the second chance could be wonderful and meaningful. No one should miss it if they get it. And as per the prologue, the fifth season. At 50, Dr. Mira believed life had entered its fifth season, neither spring nor winter, but a quiet, honest time when truth mattered more than speed. Widowed for 2 decades, she had raised her children alone, built a thriving practice as a psychologist and an academician, learned that love did not die, it waited. When news arrived from the United States that her daughter had delivered a beautiful girl baby, Mira felt a tenderness that she had never known. And the grandmother, she is at last, she packed her bags for New Jersey, promising herself a year of devotion to the tiny life that now needed her. She did not know that the journey would also return love to her own life steadily, courageously, and forever. Chapter 1, The Flight That Refused to Go. Dr. Meera stood at Kempagoda International Airport, Bangalore, with a stillness that came only from long years of self reliance. The glass walls reflected a woman who had survived grief, responsibility, relentless expectation without surrendering her gentleness. At 50, she was neither tired nor hurried, and only expectations without surrendering her gentleness. At 50, she was neither tired nor hurried, only purposeful. Her handbag held more than documents and medicines. It carried memories of a life lived alone with dignity. The announcement for the direct flight from Bangalore to the United States echoed through the terminal. A straight flight, 15 hours, she thought, like her own life, no detours and no shortcuts, only endurance. She had traveled across continents before lecturing, consulting, healing minds, yet America felt different. It was not work that summoned her now, but love in its newest form, her granddaughter, born thousands of miles away, already binding her heart across oceans. As Dr. Meera settled into a seat, adjusting her shawl carefully, a familiar unease brushed past her calm. Letting go, even temporarily, had never been easy. Her children were grown, her daughter a respected doctor in the United States, her son a globetrotter and a business prodigy, but mother would never loosen its grip. However, she recalls how with heavy heart she packed and reached the airport alone. The suitcase stood near the door like an accusation. Mira had packed it slowly, folding each sari and dresses with the care one gives to fragile memories, and every item felt heavier than its weight because leaving was never just about distance, it was about severing the routines and silences and the one presence that had quietly stitched her life back together. She was going to the United States to see her daughter and granddaughter, a journey any mother should welcome with joy, yet fear sat deep in her chest, unnamed and relentless. Rajiv, a thought of not seeing him, even for a few weeks, unsettled her more than she wished to admit. He was not just a neighbor, not merely a friend. He had become her constant, the voice that checked if she had eaten, the footsteps she recognized in the corridor, the calm that followed her storms after everything she had endured. Rajiv was familiarity without demand, companionship without possession. The idea of absence reopened old wounds of loss, abandonment, or people disappearing without warning. That night she called him. I'm flying on Tuesday, she said softly. Early morning, Bangalore to Newark. And that was brief silence on the other end. I wanted you to know, she continued, steadying her voice. Be brave, be happy, don't worry about me. Rajiv listened without interrupting. He always did. And when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, almost too composed. You will be fine, Meera. Go be with your daughter and grandkid. And she did not hear the smile he was hiding. The airport was loud, but Meera felt alone as she completed the formalities and walked toward the gate. Her heart grew unbearably heavy. She replaced Rajiv's words, his restraint, his acceptance, and it hurt more than protest ever could. And this was how people disappeared from her life, she thought, quietly, politely, without drama. Inside the aircraft, she took her seat by the window. The engines hummed, passengers settled, overhead bins shut like final decision. Mira closed her eyes, tears gathered uninvited. She imagined Rajiv in the empty corridor back home, the lights switched off early, the silence stretching longer than usual. She pressed her lips together, trying to be strong, trying not to let grief leak into a journey meant for love. Ma'am, the flight attendant said gently, please fasten your seat belt. Mira nodded, wiping the corner of her eyes, and then the familiar voice, excuse me, is the seat taken? Her breath stopped. She opened her eyes slowly, disbelief rising before her dared to form. There he was. Rajiv stood in the aisle, holding a boarding pass. His expression calm, but his eyes unmistakably bright. For a moment, the world froze. The aircraft, the noise, the years of restraint. Rajiv, she whispered, as if saying his name too loudly might shatter him. I thought, she said quietly, you shouldn't fly alone, Rajiv said, and her shock dissolved into tears, this time unstoppable. And she covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling, the weight she had carried for months collapsing into an instant. You, how she managed, and same flight, same day, he replied simply, taking the seat beside her. You asked me to be brave and happy in your absence. I decided to be brave in your presence instead. Mira laughed through her tears, a sound that surprised even her. It felt unfamiliar, light, unguarded. As the plane began to taxi, and she realized something profound. This was not coincidence nor impulsiveness. It was quite loyalty, the kind that does not announce itself, does not demand acknowledgement, but shows up with its matters most. And she looked out of the window, then back at Rajiv. For the first time in a long while, the journey ahead did not terrify her, because some bonds refuse distance, some companions refuse silence, and some flights are never meant to be taken alone. And though Rajiv had got 3 rows behind her, he just exchanged it, and Mira looked at Rajiv. Rajiv watched quietly, and he had aged faster than his years, not from illness but from neglect. His life had been reduced to transactions and demands, affection replaced by arithmetic. When he heard Mira was traveling to New Jersey, something inside him rebelled like solitude. Decision had been impulsive, almost reckless, a ticket booked in haste, a suitcase packed without deliberation. Yet, for the first time in years, Rajiv felt honest excitement rather than fear. When Mira turned back briefly to place her bag in the overhead compartment, their eyes met. Recognition flickered, not romantic, not dramatic, but human. Two people had carried their lives with restraint, suddenly aware they were not alone or on their long journey west. As the aircraft began to taxi, neither of them knew that this flight would not merely cross continents but rewrite the remaining chapters of their lives. And the next chapter, it is about the 15 hours of becoming. The seat belt sign blinked off, and whether the careful distance Mira had learned to maintain in life loosened just a little. Rajiv rose first, retrieving a blanket from the overhead bin and offering it to her without a ceremony. There was no eagerness in his gesture, only attentiveness. Mira accepted it with a nod, surprised by how naturally the act fit into the rhythm of the moment. The cabin dimmed as the aircraft climbed into the night sky. The 15 hours stretched ahead, an expanse of time suspended between continents, obligations, and identities. They began with ordinary conversation. Rajiv spoke of his son in New Jersey and the quiet pride softened by distance. Mira spoke of her daughter's medical career, the long nights of study, the resilience demanded of women who chose both profession and family. Gradually, words deepened. Mira spoke of widowhood not as tragedy but as endurance of raising children alone while building her career as a psychologist and entrepreneur. of learning to sleep without another heartbeat beside her. Rajiv listened without interruption. It was a skill he had forgotten to listen without preparing a defense. He spoke haltingly at first of a marriage that had returned transactional, of a wife who measured affection in property and crores of meals, never shared doors, never opened, a bed always cold, of an elderly mother neglected when she needed care most. Mira did not judge and she did not offer advice, she offered a presence. And somewhere over Europe, turbulence shook the cabin. Instinctively, Rajiv placed his head over Mira, steady but tentative. She did not withdraw. The touch lingered, comforting, respectful, electric in its restraint. He ordered meals for both of them, remembered her preference for tea, adjusted the air vent when she shivered, and Mira, unused to being cared for, felt something unfamiliar bloom, a softness she had long disciplined out of herself. They watched an old film together, sharing earphones and shoulders almost touching when Mira dozed. Her head leaned briefly against Rajiv's arm, and he remained still for nearly an hour, unwilling to disturb the fragile trust forming between them. Time zones blurred and shaded the past, and when dawn approached, pale light seeped through the windows. Mira awoke to find Rajiv watching the sky, not her. The discretion touched her more deeply than any declaration could have. Life, Rajiv said quietly, has taught me what I don't want. This journey is the first time I'm discovering what I might want instead. Mira smiled not as a promise but as a permission as the aircraft descended toward America. Neither of them felt the exhaustion of travel, they felt altered, and 15 hours earlier they had boarded as two solitary adults fulfilling responsibilities. They arrived as companions who had crossed an invisible threshold, one of trust, dignity, and the unspoken possibility of love. The flight entered, their belonging had just begun. The next chapter, New Jersey, new names. The aircraft touched down at New York Liberty International Airport with a quiet firmness as though acknowledging the weight of lives it carried. Mira felt the jolt travel through her spine, not of fatigue but of arrival, a continent away from everything familiar. She was here for love again, and in its newest and smallest form. As the cabin doors opened, the air felt different, cooler, brisk, tinged with the scent of rain and metal. Rajiv walked beside her without assumption, pulling her trolley when it snagged and guiding her gently through the long corridors, holding her next to him. There was no declaration between them, no claiming, only an unspoken understanding that they would not walk the threshold alone. At the arrival gate, emotions gathered like a tide, and Mira's daughter stood waiting, her white coat folded over her arm, eyes tired but glowing. With her husband in her hands lay a bundle wrapped in soft pink life distilled into 7 pounds of breath and promise. The moment the baby was placed in Mira's arms, time rearranged itself. She was no longer only a mother, a professional survivor. She was a grandmother. Tears welled unashamedly as she traced the infant's tiny fingers. 2 decades of single motherhood, sacrifice, resilience seemed to circle back into this fragile warmth. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the oceans crossed for her. Few steps away, Rajiv embraced his son, an awkward, tender hug between men who loved deeply but spoke sparingly. His son watched Mira quietly, taking in the way she held the child, the calm authority of her presence, and there was a respect in his gaze. And introductions followed, measured, polite, layered with curiosity, and Mira sensed no suspicion, only cautious hope. Family she knew felt the truth long before words attempted to define it. Outside New Jersey unfolded in clean lines and steady movement, and wide roads, the leafy neighborhoods, homes that stood with quiet confidence rather than display. As they drew, coincidence revealed itself gently. Their houses were on the same street. The realization settled between between them like a secret smile. Days began to take shape. Mira slipped effortlessly into caregiving, night feeds, lullabies, and gentle walk with a stroller beneath turning trays. Her daughter and son in law, both doctors, moved between hospital shifts, on call emergencies, grateful beyond words for Mira's steady presence. Rajiv visited, often never intruding, always welcome. He learned the baby's rhythms, learned Mira's too. They walked together in the evening, spoke of books and travel, of what it meant to start again without erasing the past in the new country. And shopping trips followed, groceries, warm clothes, small indulgences, sightseeing on weekends, quiet cafes, riverside parks, and museums that invite a reflection rather than spectacle. New Jersey did not demand performance, it allowed belonging. And for the first time in years, Raji woke without dread. For the first time in decades, Meera allowed herself to be met halfway, and they were not escaping their lives, they were renaming them. The next chapter, Choosing Life, New Jersey, gave Rajiv something he had not known he was missing: silence without loneliness. In the evenings after the day settled into lamplight and the routine, he would sit by the window of his son's house, watching the street where Meera lived just a few doors away. The distance between them was small yet respectful, mirroring the space they allowed each other's hearts. And it was in that quiet that truth grew impossible to ignore. His marriage had long ceased to be companionship. It had become a contract without consent. His wife Sona spoke the language of possession fluently, and property shares crows while withholding the smallest currencies of care. She had never waited at the door for him. She never asked him if he had eaten, never smoothed a pillow or listened to his fatigue, and love, if it had been existed, had been reduced to leverage. And what hurt most was not his own neglect, but his mother's. In her 80s, frail and increasingly dependent, she had been treated as an inconvenience. Rajiv carried the guilt like a second spine. With Meera, life felt different, not because she promised happiness, but because she practiced kindness as instinct. She asked about Rajiv's mother daily. She noticed his silences and respected them. She made space without claiming ownership. One evening, as they walked along the quiet street, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, and Rajiv stopped. I don't want to live the rest of my life like a compromise, he said. Meera did not answer immediately. She understood the weight of decision that altered many lives at once. Choosing life, she said gently, must not destroy others, Rajiv. It must free you first. And that night, Rajiv made his decision not recklessly but resolutely. He would not return to emotional starvation, and he would seek dignity even if the cost was high. And he knew Sona would not let go easily. But for the first time, fear did not lead his choices, hope did. The case that came home, and India received Rajiv not with warmth but with summons. At the moment he landed, his phone filled with messages, sharp, legal, unyielding. Sona had moved swiftly. The demand was precise and cruel in its simplicity: a divorce accompanied by alimony of 5 crores or surrender of the house. There was no mention of reconciliation, no space for conversation, only extraction. Rajiv felt the old weakness return, the familiar tightening in his chest. Years of emotional erosion had trained him to give in before conflict fully emerged. The thought of courtrooms, accusations, and public exposure exhausted him even before it began. Meera arrived 2 days later. She did not come as a woman in love, though the truth existed quietly between them. She came as an advocate, calm, prepared, and afraid. Her LLB had not been ornamental, and she had studied law with the same discipline she applied to psychology, understanding that justice was as much about structure as it was about intent. She listened to Rajiv's account without interruption, making notes, asking only what mattered, and when she finished, she closed the file gently. This case, she said, will not be fought with anger. It will be resolved with clarity. And Sona's lawyer was aggressive, accustomed to intimidation. He spoke in raised voice and exaggerated claims, abandoned cruelty, emotional neglect, and Meera countered quietly, dismantling each assertion with documentation, timelines, and precedent. And she did not attack Sona's character. She focused focused on facts. The house became the central battlefield. Rajiv's mother, now frail and immobile, wished only to remain where she had lived for decades. Meera presented medical records, age-related protections, and moral argument woven seamlessly into legal logic. Negotiations stretched for weeks, and Rajiv watched from the margins, astonished. The woman he loved was steady when others faltered, and she shielded him from unnecessary confrontation, ensured his dignity remained intact, and never once spoke for him without consent. Finally, Meera proposed a settlement. 3 crores final, no further claims, divorce by mutual consent. It was not generosity, it was strategy. Sona resisted, then recalculated. The certainty of closure outweighed prolonged litigation. The agreement was signed. Rajiv walked out of the courtroom legally free, his mother's home secured, his name unblemished, and the cost had been high, but the price of continued submission would have been higher. That evening, as they sat quietly on the veranda of the house, Rajiv spoke with unguarded emotion. "You didn't just fight my case, Meera," he said. "You gave me my life back." Meera looked at him steadily. "No," she replied. "You chose it. I only stood beside you, Rajiv." The case had come home, and for the first time, home felt safe again. The next chapter, the mother's blessing. The case did not end quietly. On the final hearing day, the courtroom was crowded with routine impatience, lawyers shuffling files, and litigants rehearsing anger, the clock indifferent to human urgency. Meera stood composed beside Rajiv, her file arranged with a surgical order. Rajiv's mother waited outside, too frail for the benches. Her presence felt even in absence. Sona arrived draped in confidence, her counsel sharp with accusation. When her turn came, restraint dissolved, and she called Rajiv impotent at the age of 53, a word chosen to wound rather than prove. And she spoke of her failed marriage, pointedly implicating his mother, suggesting that Rajiv's devotion to an aging parent had destroyed conjugal life. She claimed entitlement to divorce and alimony as compensation for years, and she described as wasted. The courtroom still. Meera rose slowly. "My lord," she began, her voice even, her English precise, and allegations require evidence, not volume. She laid out the record with a methodical clarity, medical reports disproving the slur, photographs, and the documents charting Rajiv's presence as a loving father, responsible son, financial statements revealing decades of sustained earning in crores. And she spoke of a man who had built a family and a future with the discipline, not indulgence. Then she addressed what had been omitted. "Sona lived in the house, gave birth to a child," Meera said without malice. "But marriage is not a residence alone, it is conduct." And she presented messages and timelines that showed emotional withdrawal, prolonged separation, and Sona's interest in another person, facts, not conjecture. And she did not vilify, she contextualized it. Finally, Meera turned to the heart of the matter. "Rajiv is not contesting divorce," she said. He seeks dignity. Both parties have lived separately for years. To prolong this matter, my lord, serves neither justice nor the court. Grant them divorce at the earliest. Let each reclaim time, especially in later life when companionship is not luxury but necessity." There was no flourish at the end, only reason. The magistrate leaned forward, and eyes attentive. When he spoke, the room listened. "Counsel," he said, "your command over facts, language, and restraint is exemplary, and the court appreciates your clarity." He paused, then added with rare warmth, "Mr. Rajiv would do well to keep you not only as a counsel but also as his best friend lifelong." He dictated the judgment slowly, deliberately, as the stenographer kept pace. The judgment: upon perusal of pleadings and evidence and submissions, this court finds that marriage between the parties has irretrievably broken down. The parties have been living separately for a considerable period, and no useful purpose will be served by prolonging the litigation. Allegations made without medical or documentary proof are hereby rejected. The respondent is found to be a capable individual, a responsible father, a dutiful son, having contributed substantially to the family's welfare over several decades. And this court further observes that matrimony, companionship, is founded on conduct and mutual respect, not mere cohabitation. In the interest of justice, equity and judiciary economy, the court directs that marriage be dissolved by mutual consent and subject to final settlements as agreed. The parties are at liberty to rebuild their lives with dignity. The gavel struck softly 3 times. The order followed swiftly. The direction was clear. Time would not be wasted. Outside the courtroom, Rajiv exhaled a breath he had been holding for years. His mother, informed of the outcome, wept quietly, not from victory but from relief. That afternoon, in a room washed with the soft sunlight, she took Mira's hand. "You are not here only for him," she said, her voice thin but certain. "You are here because you know how to stay." She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Marry my son, Mira." Rajiv stood at the doorway, fear flickering, of burdening Mira, of asking too much. Mira answered before doubt could settle. "Let us speak of choice," she said softly, "not obligation." Later that evening, Mira called her daughter in New Jersey, and the baby's coos grounded the conversation in continuity. Mira spoke honestly of companionship, loneliness, and shade of respect found without erasing the past. Her daughter listened. Then she said simply, "Amma, you gave us everything. You are allowed to live your life as you wish, and it's your own." Rajiv's son too saw the change. His father straighter, lighter. "Do what makes you whole, Papa," he said. That night there were no plans, no timelines. The blessings had been given, the decision remained theirs, and they did not rush it. When Mira finally said yes, it was not spoken, it was lived. And the next chapter, it is about the simple ceremony, and they chose a morning that asked for nothing, no auspicious excess and no borrowed grandeur. The sky was clear, the light honest, and in the old house they had witnessed the endurance more than celebration. Chairs were arranged in a half circle, leaving space for breath and movement. Mira wore a simple silk sari in a muted shade bought by Rajiv, her hair neatly tied back, her presence composed. There was no heavy jewelry to display, only a thin chain and a ring, and the confidence of a woman who had lived fully before choosing again. And Rajiv dressed quietly, his hands steady, as if fastened his buttons. He felt no nervousness, only gratitude. This was not an escape into marriage, it was an arrival. And friends gathered first, people who had seen them separately through grief, struggle, and silence. Then family. And Raj's mother was brought to the front seat where she could see everything. Her eyes, dimmed by age, shone with unmistakable clarity. Mira's daughter arrived with a baby in her arms, and Mira's son-in-law too came. The child slept through the ceremony, unaware that she was a quiet witness of a new beginning born from many endings. And there were no lengthy rituals, no declaration meant for display, only a few spoken vows, care, honesty, steadiness, promises not to possess but to protect. And the Mangal Sutra was tied. There was no applause, it's just a shade, exhale. It is a second chance of love. Raju's mother placed her trembling hand on their joint palms. Now she said softly, "You are not alone, my son." The words carried more weight than any blessing shouted into microphones. Afterward, they shared a modest meal, simple food, familiar flavors, and conversation flowed without formality. Laughter came easily. No one asked about the past. Everyone acknowledged the present. And that evening, as the house settled into new rhythm, Mira moved through the rooms with ease, not as a guest but not yet as an owner either. Raji watched her with a calm that surprised him. This was not the intensity of early romance. It was something rarer, belonging without erasure. That night they slept peacefully, side by side, not clinging, not afraid. Two lives aligned, not by need but by choice. The ceremony had been simple, the commitment was profound. Next chapter, home again. Marriage did not rearrange their lives overnight. It softened them into alignment. Morning began quietly, Meera raising early to prepare tea the way Rajiv liked it, and Rajiv opening the windows to let the day enter without haste. The house learned their rhythms and adjusted itself around them. Rajiv's mother became the axis of their shared joy and days, and Meera structured care with the precision of a professional and the tenderness of a daughter. Physiotherapy, exercise countered patiently, and meals very professional and tenderness of a daughter, and balanced for a fragile digestion. The meals are balanced for fragile digestion, and stories encouraged even when they wandered into repetition. Rajiv brought this devotion with humility, aware that love could be practiced, not proclaimed. And children arrived during holidays, filling the rooms with voices and motion. And Meera's daughter brought the baby, now alert, cautious, reaching for everything. And Rajiv Sen joined them, learning to call Meera family without effort or strain. And and Meera's son also participated in so many activities, though he is a globetrotter, a busy businessman, multi-crowder. The house expanded to whole new laughter without losing its quiet. Evenings often found them seated together on the veranda, revisiting memories about bitterness, and they spoke of losses honestly and of hopes carefully, neither demanding the other erase the past. Grief was not an intruder here, it was an acknowledgement that allowed to rest. And there were ordinary disagreements, small preferences, habits learned over decades, and by resolved gently. And Meera's training as as a psychologist gave language of feelings, and Rajiv's presence gave space to practice what might once have become conflict turned into an understanding. As seasons passed, Rajiv's mother weakened on her final days, almost after 3 years of their marriage, and Meera stayed by her bedside, holding her hand through the long silence. Rajiv sat nearby, steady, grateful, with his mother when his mother passed. It was without fear in the house she loved, surrounded by care and honored her life. After the rituals, the house felt hollow for a while. Chase remained where she used to sit. The hallway echoed differently. Meera and Rajiv moved through the room slowly, allowing grief its time. They did not consider leaving home. They had learned was not built by absence of pain, but by courage to remain where memories lived. And the next chapter, what remains, and grief does not announce its departure. It changes shape after Rajiv's mother passed. The house entered a period of quiet recalibration. Her room remained untouched for weeks. The neatly folded saris, the spectacles resting beside the bed, and the chair, the rocking chair, the faint scent of medicated oil lingering in the air. Meera understood this pause. As a psychologist, she had guided many through loss. As a woman, she knew the absence required acknowledgement before adaptation. Rajiv moved through the days with restraint. He did not collapse, but neither did he pretend strength. Meera watched him closely, not to intervene, but to remain available. They grieved side by side, allowing silence to do its careful work. One evening, while sorting through old papers, they discovered a small notebook belonging to Rajiv's mother. She was a school teacher and retired. Inside were brief entries, names of neighbors, reminders to give away extra food, notes about people who lived alone. On the last page, written shakingly, were three words: no one forgotten. And it touched the heart of both Meera and Rajiv. No one forgotten. The phrase stayed with them. In the weeks that followed, Meera noticed how often the elderly people passed their gate, some walking slowly, some lingering as though unsure where to go. Rajiv too began to speak of the men and women who had seen in court corridors during his case, aged parents without their children who are far away, waiting alone on benches, treated as footnotes in the family disputes. And the idea did not arrive suddenly, it formed gradually with the patience of lived experience. They decided to create an old age home, not as charity but as continuity, a place where dignity was not conditional, where companionship was offered without interrogation. Meera designed the emotional framework, routine with respect, care without condensation. Rajiv managed logistics, fundings, and structure with quiet efficiency. They named it as the old age home, going steadily. The name of the old age, going steadily. Residents arrived hesitantly at first, and widows, abandoned parents, men and women whose children lived too far, had drifted too far away. House filled with measured footsteps and cautious conversations. Slowly, laughter returned, and different from family laughter but no less real. Meera conducted group sessions under the banyan tree. Rajiv organized evening walk, reading circles. Birthdays were celebrated without a spectacle, only sincerity, and their children visited during vacation, bringing stories from abroad, gifts for the residents, and respect for what their parents had built. The granddaughter grew toddling, and through corridors they held more wisdom than walls. At night, Meera and Raju often sat together watching the lights turns off one by one. They spoke less now, not because there was nothing left to say, but because understanding had settled into habit. What remained was not youth, what remained was meaning. And before that, the next chapter, the measure of mercy. The news arrived without warning, carried in a voice stripped of its former sharpness. Sona had cancer. The diagnosis came late, as such truth often did, when the body had already begun its quiet withdrawal. Chemotherapy followed swiftly, and with it the losses that medicine could not soften. Her hair fell away in clumps, her strength diminished, the confidence that once armored her demands dissolved into fear, beauty, wealth, and leverage. Everything Sona had trusted failed her at once. And friends disappeared, relatives offered excuses, the phone rang less frequently, then not at all. And in the long corridors of hospitals and rental rooms, Sona discovered that she had never prepared for illness and did not negotiate. And though she is just 52 years old, it was Meera who came not as a rival, not as a victor in an old battle, but as woman who understood suffering without hierarchy. And Meera arrived quietly, carrying home cooked food, medical reports neatly arranged, questions prepared for doctor who no longer had time to explain. Sona was startled by her presence. "Why are you here?" she asked once, her voice thin, stripped of pride. And Meera answered simply, "Because you are human, you are my sister." In the months that followed, Meera became who had no one else had chosen to be a sister in the final season, and she sat through chemotherapy sessions, held sonas, and during nights when pain refused to sleep, and listened when regret surfaced in broken sentences. Sona spoke of fear, of mistakes, of loneliness she had mistaken for power. Meera did not correct her, she did not absolve her either. She listened, which was mercy enough. Raji visited occasionally, conflicted and gentle. He wept silently. The first time he saw Sona diminished beyond recognition, the anger he once carried had no place in the face of mortality. Within 6 months of the diagnosis, Sona died, and there was no spectacle at the end, only exhaustion and a final shallow breath in her will written with Meera's guidance but without correction. And she donated the remaining alimony she possessed to the old age, going steadily. And it was her last act of restitution. Raju mourned deeply, not for the marriage that had failed, but for the human life that had suffered. And he cried openly, allowing grief to cleanse what resentment never could. Afterwards, something in him shifted permanently. He began to take care of Meera with a reverence born of loss, ensuring her rest, guarding her health, attentive to every silence. Love for him now was vigilance. He had learned how fragile companionship could be, and Meera too did the same. Received this care without fear, she understood its source, and they did not speak often of destiny, but they lived its truth, and they had been shaped by different storms, tempered by solitude and given a chance only in the second half of life, after 50, late but not less. When they shared, what they shared now was not urgency, and it was gratitude. And they had not been made for beginnings, and they had been made for endurance. And the last epilogue, going steadily. Time did not rush them, everything was set and settled. I repeat, time did not rush them. After everything was said and settled, and it walked beside them, Meera and Rajiv. That love, in its truest form, was not loud or impatient. It arrived each morning in small rituals, shade tea, quiet prayers, a habit of asking, "How are you today?" and listening to the answer. Rajiv watched over Meera with tenderness shaped by laws, and they have learned the care was not control but attention. Meera, in turn, remained the axis of calm around which lives and gently resolved. She balanced affection with independence, memory with hope, did not erase the past, she integrated it, and the old age home, going steadily, grew into a living testament of what they believed, that no one should age in abandonment. The dignity did not expire with productivity. The residents called Meera Dr. Amma and Rajiv. So titles that carry trust rather than hierarchy. The children visited during holidays, bringing stories from distant cities and countries. The granddaughter grew up knowing that love had many forms and many timings, and she learned simply by watching that companionship could begin even when society thought it should end. Some evenings, Meera Rajiv sat on the same house that had once echoed with grief. Now it held memory without sorrow. They spoke of destiny rarely, and when they did, it was without resentment. And life had not denied them love, and it had delayed it until they were ready to hold it without fear. They went on hand in hand, heart aligned with heart, not hurried by age, not haunted by loss. They went on, going steadily. A synopsis: Going Steadily is a literary novel about love, dignity, and second beginnings beyond the age of 50. Dr. Meera, a 50-year-old psychologist, entrepreneur, and a widow of 2 decades, travels from India to the United States to care for a newborn granddaughter. On the journey, she is reunited with Rajiv, a 53-year-old man emotionally starved in a transactional marriage and overburdened by the legal and familial and neglect. A long flight becomes a turning point, awakening companionship between two mature souls in New Jersey. Amid caregiving, family bonds, and quiet rediscovery, Rajiv chooses dignity over compromise and seeks divorce from his estranged wife, Sona. And when the conflict escalates into a brutal legal battle, Meera steps forward not only as a partner but as an advocate, as she is a completed LLP with clarity, restraint, and moral courage. She secures Raj's freedom and protects his aging mother's home and restores his self worth. A simple marriage follows, and free of spectacle, rich in meaning. Fate tests their humanity further when Sona is later diagnosed with a terminal cancer. In an act of rare compassion, Meera cares for a former rival in her final months, and Sona dies reconciled, donating her alimony to a shared vision that overlives conflict. Together, Meera Rajiv established Going Steadily, an old age home dedicated to dignity, companionship, and care for the forgotten. The novel affirms a quiet truth: love is not bound by age, destiny is not bound by timing, and the most enduring relationships are built not in youth but in wisdom. I repeat, the novel affirms a quiet truth. Um, the novel affirms a quiet truth. Love is not bound by age, destiny is not bound by timing, and the most enduring relationships are built not in youth but in wisdom.